computer. Okay. Hi, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started here in just a second. Hopefully everybody's first session, everybody went well. I noticed a couple of names that I just saw in the first session, so that one went pretty well. So we'll keep going, rolling from there. Couple of things, housekeeping reminders before we get completely started. You can always go to the MACAE website, check out updates, upcoming events, PDs, information. Don't forget Patrick's monthly check-ins. Those are always really helpful. I can't remember the exact date for the next one, but we got one coming up. Everything I am recording already, so everything that's from all day today, even if it's a session you didn't get to sit in on and you'd like to watch it later, they're all being recorded after everything is said and done for the day. We'll be sending all of that to Patrick, and he'll be getting it uploaded into the MACAE stuff. So I'm sure he'll send out an email letting everybody know where it's at and when. And be patient with him. There's going to be a lot of sessions. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on, so it's going to take a little bit of time to get it, but that's the plan. If you need sketches, the sketch form that you will be getting an email following the end of the conference, the end of the day today. Either if not today, I'm sure it'll be Monday. Have the form to fill out for your sketch validation form. Make sure you get that filled out and submitted back by the end of the day, by next Friday, the 19th. And then that way MACAE can get those processed and get everything sent out to you so you can do your evaluation and get credit for your sketches. As far as the presentation goes, we encourage everybody to keep your cameras on. Just get a little sense of community going. And if you have anything, try to stay muted. Whitney already mentioned that, but stay muted. But at the same time, if you have a question, she's already said she doesn't have a problem with people unmuting for questions. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat. You can use the raise your hand icon, or depending on what's going on, we can maybe just jump in there. But other than that, I think we're good to go. So with that note, I'll introduce Whitney Dettmer from your Iosco RESA. Why do I always forget that? Iosco RESA, she's also the MACAE regional rep for that whole region, which is pretty much all of the northeastern side of the Lower Peninsula, right?
Yep, northeast and northwest. We combined them. For
Oh,
MACAE.
you guys did. You guys basically got all of northern Lower Michigan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But she's going to give us a nice little presentation on personal curriculum, which I know me personally in our program, that's something we want to look at using more. So I'm going to let Whitney take it away.
All right. And Chad, I know there's a couple people in the waiting room. I can't see the waiting room, but someone texted me.
I just let a couple people in, and then a couple people more just jumped in.
Okay. Sounds good. So I'll just give you a little quick overview of our program at RESA. We do adult education for ABE, diplomas, and equivalencies. And we just started an ESL program. We're in week 7. It's going like gangbusters, as one of my old teachers would say. So we're really excited about that. I'm going to share with you guys today about personal curriculum. It's something that we talk a lot about in our HSE committee meetings that happen one Friday a month. So if you're interested in diploma or equivalency, that's generally what our conversation centers around on those Fridays. So you're welcome to join us, and there's sketches available for those too. This is a presentation that came pretty much directly from the state, from Rochelle Bowerman. My boss, Tina Williams, did do some tweaking to it to fit our programs. And I'm going to share with you what we've done for our alternative program and for the adult ed side. The differences are just negligible. So if you have questions, please just unmute and talk. I don't expect us to take the full time. So if we get off on side conversations, that's totally fine. We have lots of time for questions. The button, it didn't go. Okay. So a personal curriculum is just a tool for modifying the Michigan Merit Curriculum so that you can individualize the rigor and relevance of the state graduation requirements. So what are some of the common challenges you and your district face with personalized curriculums? Again, if you want to unmute and talk, you can. Or if you want to put in the chat, we've never done this before. We're hoping to start. You can also do that.
I have a question.
Sure.
Do you have to have an IEP to do personal curriculum?
Nope. And we're going to go through that too. There's a few different ways that you can do personal curriculum. IEP is one of them, and that's the most flexible.
Whitney, I was going to share a benefit success story. So a couple times now I have people who almost graduated, not in Michigan. And there's a thing in the personal curriculum that if you do your first, 2 years elsewhere, you can, you pretty much only have to fulfill very minimal requirements compared to the whole MMC. So a couple people we have graduated that only needed, like in a couple cases, it was only our classes to establish residency, and they had met like, 22 credits or whatever, which was cool. The challenge, I think, is kind of what the question that I can't remember who just asked, but there's a lot of misconceptions in K-12, the traditional K-12 high school, that like we got a counselor from there last year and he knew nothing about this. And like they were telling people, I had somebody come and say, I just can't pass algebra 2B. That's the only thing I need. And I'm like, well, we can write you a personal curriculum, because that one is something that's allowed for everybody. So I think the misconceptions are a challenge. Yeah,
I definitely would agree with that. And you'll find we cover 8 counties, so I don't even know how many school districts that is. We have one school district that will use the PC a lot, and if we get their students, they send the PC to us, and a lot of times we'll just do what the school district said. But does anybody else have anything that they want to share? Otherwise, I'm going to continue on. And it might answer some of the questions. Okay. Okay. So there are 4 types of PCs, personal curriculum, enrichment to go beyond the academic credit requirements. So this is going to be maybe you have someone that really loves science and they want to do extra science classes above and beyond the minimum requirement for the Michigan Merit Curriculum. So in that case, maybe they wouldn't do the second year of foreign language. Instead, they would do that extra science because they know for their educational plan that after high school, they want to go and be a chemist or physicist or whatever their plan is. Enrichment supports the area of what their future plans are. And actually all of them support future plans. But enrichment is to get those extra classes in their the area that they like the most or have most interest in. The second one is general. So this is to modify the math requirement. And Rochelle Bowerman, if you guys know her from the state office, really pushes that algebra 2B. You can essentially do a personal curriculum to drop algebra 2B altogether. So then it would be 3.5 credits required for graduation for math. It does, all of these PCs need to be board approved. So the processes need to be board approved. Our board chose that if we're going to drop algebra 2B, they still want the students to have some sort of math. So we find another substitute math class to put in place for that Algebra 2B. And that's the one that I think gets used most commonly, at least in the adult ed area. When we're looking at PCs, like I said, it always has to support their future goals. So in the document, it talks about what their plans are. And if they are planning to go to college or even have a little inkling of wanting to go to college, we have them work through that Algebra 2, because we just feel like if you're going to college, you're going to need that. For special education, you can modify the requirements of the Michigan Merit Curriculum based on the disability of a student with an IEP. This really opens up so you can make changes to really any of the requirements. And then, like Joy was saying, transfers, anyone that spent at least 2 years in high school out of state, you can transfer credits in or change the requirements for the Michigan Merit Curriculum. Really, it's to kind of fit what the state that they came from, that track that they were on. And we have used this, and I have an example of that. So here's some more information about enrichment. So it's to go beyond the academic requirements by substituting 1 credit of the following for additional coursework in the core content areas. So, like I said, if they love math or if they love science, they would do an extra credit of that in place of either art, PE and health, or a social studies credit. Everybody has to take civics. Everybody everywhere takes civics. Any questions about this? It's pretty straightforward.
I know this is one that both of my daughters have used. No questions asked from the school side. They just, neither one of them, they're like, what's the point in taking PE? I don't want to do PE. So both of them took, I believe, extra science to not, they wanted to take the extra science, but it was also because they didn't want to take PE, but it worked out for them. So
Nice.
I've heard that health is really important, that they don't, and maybe that's just my district, they don't like to PC out of health. It's easy, like Chad said, in my district anyway, to PC out of phys ed, but not health.
Yeah, it probably just depends on the district. So
I was gonna
students
say one
may-
thing real quick. Stacy mentioned in the chat that they use, if people have extra electives, they've used PCs to, sorry, phone ringing at the same time. But how they've used the PC to use some of those those extra electives to get them over the hump to graduation. Not sure on how that one works, so I don't know if Stacy's got a insight on that one.
So sometimes, because we only require 22 credits for our high school diploma for adult or alternative ed, a lot of times when students have finished, like say 11th or even part of 12th grade in a traditional high school, they come to us lacking some of the core requirements, like especially the math and usually the English, but they have way more electives than they need, because that's where traditional high schools make up the bulk of their graduation requirements. Because there's like the core 18, that's like, you can't, the Michigan Merit Curriculum, right? So it's like 18 credits. And then our traditional high school requires 28. Pre-COVID, it was 27, something like that. So they're really requiring almost 9-10 elective credits. Well, we only need 3.5 to give them a diploma. So they come in with way more electives than they need because those are the fun classes that they wanted to go to and not enough of the core. So sometimes we can use that overage in electives to kind of replace a couple of things in the core requirements. Like you're saying, like there's not a lot you can't get out of civics, you can't get out of chemistry or physics. So there are a couple of things we can't do, but sometimes that's enough to like get them over the finish line, be able to count those extra electives. Does that make sense?
It does. Did you say that you're like, I know you said you require 22 for all the
Yep.
adults, but you say the high school requires like 27?
Yeah, it's like 27.5. We're on a trimester system.
Oh, okay.
So
I say that
I
makes more sense because ours is, our district for the regular high school and the alternative is 22, which includes the 18 core and then 4 elective. And for adults, we just require the 18 core. Our district signed off on that, school board signed off on it.
Mhm.
yeah, I find that a lot in adulthood. The requirements range between 18 and 20, 22. That's not very uncommon.
Mhm. Yeah, ours is 18 also. And when we go through transcripts, before even thinking about a PC, we'll try to use those elective credits, I guess you would say, wherever we can use them. Like we'll stick them in for second year of foreign language. Kathy, I saw you're on here. Where else do we? There's another place. Second year foreign language.
We also give experience for work experience credit or homemaker credit. And we'll award up to 2 credits in both of those areas for certain things.
Sometimes if,
So when we have
sometimes,
our 18-year-olds that are, I'm sorry, our 20 and older that are on the 18 credits, we can throw those like down in the elective section.
sometimes if it's something that could have a math component, we may have used it as that senior math elective. That's really the only, I mean, if we could back up a science elective or a senior math elective, I think we would use it there.
Yeah, and we always ask questions to the counselor wherever the transcripts came from, and try to word them in a way that says like, we see that this elective is listed on the transcript. Is there any way that that was a senior math? Is there any way that that had science component to it? Just to try to get more credit for students, because it does seem like there are a lot of electives, and school counselors are still putting a lot of electives in for students who need the core. Sometimes I want to pull my hair out when I have conversations with them. We'll get a referral of someone young. I just had one the other day, and she was like, well, yeah, he struggles with the classes, so he really wants to do the CTE course. I'm like, and he needs to stay with you if he wants to do CTE, that specific course. And she's like, so we're gonna give him that and 2 sections of weightlifting. I was like, you're not doing him any service by doing that. If he's eventually coming to our program, give him some credits that we can count, please. So anyway, that was a tangent. So this is just for enrichment. Maybe they really loved wood shop. You can use those credits. Okay, so this is talking about general ed, general modified math. So this is not going to be necessarily your special needs students. So the Michigan Merit Curriculum requires 4 credit. This type of PC will modify the following component of the math requirement by a half credit. So it says the students must earn at least 3 credits in math that are aligned with subject area standards approved by the state board. With a PC in place, students must earn 3.5 math credits overall and take a math or math-related experience in one of their final 2 years. Most typically done by reducing Algebra 2 by a half credit. This is our most common PC that we've used, and it is that Algebra 2 by a half credit. So the state allows 3.5 math credits. Our school board still requires 4. So if you do not use PCs currently, you do need to make sure that you draw up the rules for your school board to approve. And they might have little changes like that. Questions about the math or conversation about the math?
Now, one of the things I struggle with, because I'm doing all the counseling in our building for 2 different programs, is that I don't like the stipulation that you absolutely have to have a math-related experience in the final year, because we sometimes get, and it's infrequent because most of the time math is one of those areas where they don't have a whole lot of credits, but sometimes you see that they get that stuff done ahead of time, and then they don't need it. But then we're required to give it to them anyways because they have to have it within a certain time frame.
Yeah, you'll see that if you have like Algebra 1 taken in 8th grade, that will happen. What I've heard Rochelle Bowerman say is it's an experience. It doesn't have to be a class, and they're not talking seat time. So she gave the example that you could take a student to the grocery store and have them add up their groceries, and that would be a math experience. That would never fly for my school board, but that was just her example. I think she was giving an extreme example so that you could see that really anything could count for a math experience if there's even just a touch of math in it. And I would suggest too, if you guys do CTE programming, most of those CTE classes have some sort of math in them. So that could be their math experience. You don't have to have a math credit necessarily, especially if they've finished geometry, algebra 2, all the hard stuff.
I know for ours, and I only deal with adults. I don't deal with any alternative ed at all. I know for our adults, if they've, the few that have actually finished all the math and they come to us, it's like if they need physical science, we use that as their math experience because it's got plenty of math in it. Or like you said, something that has math in it, but it's not necessarily a math class.
Mm-hmm. And for adult ed too, their final year might span over, we've had students that have been with us for years. So it's not necessarily in that final moment before graduation. Their final year is years. Any other comments about?
So for adult ed, you don't, I mean, ours are the same way. So they don't have to, we don't know when their final year is going to be
Right.
because they're flexible when they finish their classes. So we don't have to give them a math experience at the very end in order for them to get their diploma, as long as they take it within our adult ed frame.
We don't. I don't know what the state would say necessarily about that, but if you can count going to the grocery store, I'm sure that they're doing some math in their final year.
Okay. Yeah, they usually have kids, all kinds of stuff.
Right.
Or
yeah,
even
and
taking like the TABE or CASAS, like if they're, I mean, that's a math experience. They have to post test.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do a little prep for that too. Good thinking.
There's a question in the chat too. What about a budgeting experience with that? What might it cost to live for a month, year? I think if you're including that, even if it's part of a different class, it's not even a math class. If it's like or you're just, that's an outside lesson that you're doing that's not really building credits, but you're trying to get the adults to, I think that would count. And Whitney mentioned, Rochelle mentioning Like you can take your students to the grocery store. The other thing I've heard her say out of her own mouth is, "Do you really think we have PC police?" So there's, I think, yes, this is what we need to do and we need to make sure we follow it, but it's hard to do with the adults sometimes. And I mean, I'm still learning a lot about this PC stuff and using it correctly, but I think there's also, I think there is some flexibility for us to, if you, oh, I thought they were going to graduate, so we gave them this math experience and then they didn't finish, but they finished the very beginning of the next year. I don't think you're going to get like nailed hard for that.
No, and the PC police is just going to be your own district. So
yeah, because if, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's got to be, the PC has to be approved by the student. If they're an alternative and they're still a minor, by the parent, by the teacher, and by the school superintendent, correct?
or designee.
Or designee.
So yeah, I usually sign those just because I meet with the students, but we're everywhere. We're not in anywhere near superintendent ever. But he's made me the designee for adult ed.
And I think this math one will probably be the most useful one when it comes to adults. Not the only useful one, but this is definitely where, especially if you got older adults. And when I say older, the older ones don't even have to meet Michigan merit curriculum, but the ones that are, you know, they're not going to go on to something where they're going to need that second half of algebra 2, or even the first half for that matter. This is actually a perfect one to use.
Mm-hmm. Something else that Rochelle has stressed a lot is, a lot of times we think of like the credits and they need this many credits, but what the Michigan merit curriculum stresses is that they have that content knowledge. So it's more about the content knowledge than it is the credits or the seat time. So we also in our program, and this isn't really related to PCs, but if a student has taken a class, maybe they didn't pass it in the district because of attendance, or, you know, whatever, a parent died at the end of the semester, things happen. If we believe that the student has had some experience with the topic and prior knowledge, we allow them to test out of it. And if they get a 77% on the end of semester exam, they have that content knowledge. So we issue credit for the class. So just as we're going through this, just keep in mind that it's not seat time, but content. So this is one that I don't deal with a lot in the adult ed. Our students who have IEPs are generally in our alternative ed. This is about any students with IEPs to modify based on the needs of a student with an IEP, allows modifications to any Michigan merit curriculum requirement due to the impact of their disability has on accessing or demonstrating proficiency and meeting expectations. And this last bullet point is important in all of these areas. So for IEP specifically, it must align with their IEP, transition plan, and EDP while keeping the Michigan merit curriculum relevant and rigorous. All of the PCs that you do need to align with their EDP or their, for adults, the ALP. That's like the primary reason for doing the PC. Any comments about this one? I'm gonna go on. So it has lots of flexibility, but you'll have a special ed teacher working on this with you. Okay, and this is one that we've talked about a little bit, transfer. So for transfer students who have completed the equivalent of 2 years of high school content out of state or country or non-public school, once you designate them as a transfer student, modifications are allowed in any Michigan merit curriculum content area similar to students with IEPs. The PC must be aligned with the EDP. So that's just their post-secondary or post-school goals. And again, everybody takes civics. Okay, so some requirements and considerations. It must support students' post-secondary goals. That's the primary reason that you'd be doing a PC. Post-secondary goals must be supported through documentation. PCs do not transfer anywhere. So the PC that you have in your school district, a student can't just assume that if they move, they're going to have that same PC. We have found that we work well with the school counselors. We have so much conversation around so many things that we'll just call them up and say like, hey, did this person have a PC? Could you send it over to me? We're looking to do something similar. So you can obviously work with the other districts, but it does not have to transfer. It should always be written to include as much of the Michigan Merit curriculum as possible, and not request excessive modifications. If students change their mind during their high school completion on post-school goals, it could void the PC and could mean extra time in high school to complete Michigan Merit curriculum. So the example of dropping that Algebra 2B, and then later on they decide that they do want to go to college, they really need that class. So that could void the PC. And that's going to be a conversation that you have with a student and possibly parents, depending on their age. And then students and parents must agree to any modifications. Questions, comments, stories?
I have a question about the Algebra 2 B.
Okay.
And so that's the thing I'm struggling with if they decide to go to college later. But as adults, will they be given an entrance exam for math anyway? Or because I'm wondering if they're going to rush through it and maybe not remember it if they go to college a couple years back. I mean, that's my struggle. I want them to be prepared, but at the same time, I have a not so nice relationship with Algebra 2 with our students. I feel that Algebra 2 keeps us in business because I wish the high schools would do more to modify that. So I would love to give them the PC for the Algebra 2B, but then I worry too, is that going to affect them if they do decide to go to college, or well, even if they take it, will they have to be tested for math placement anyway? So it really wouldn't matter. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, you are. So I believe they would take the placement test. And so my thought is if they've taken the class, they would probably do better on that placement test, even if it's been a while or it was hard for them in adult ed, they've at least been exposed to and worked through some of it. But there are the lower level college classes that you pay for and don't get credit for. So that's an option too. You know what I mean? It's not like they can't go to college if they don't have Algebra 2B. But it might just end up costing them more later, you know?
And I think it also depends. I mean, our area, my community college is our local community college. And I know they use AccuPlacer as their placement test, and they do have to do math. And so I know that's part of the reason we make sure we give them as much math as we can, but I don't know really how much Algebra 2 is really on those placement tests. I think hitting the things, yes, there's definitely algebra on there, but I think even without Algebra 2, if you got somebody who's got a somewhat strong, okay math background, they'll probably do okay. And it's like, I know, I mean, I'm gonna use my own daughter for an example. And she's a senior right now, getting ready to graduate from high school, and started the year in Algebra 2. Math, she's actually a fairly decent math student. She has always done really well. Got to algebra 2. I think some of it was a combination of the teacher, but it's also the material. She struggled horribly. And she got through first semester, but even before that, being in teaching, I knew this modification existed. So we talked to her counselor, and they didn't have a problem with it at all. The biggest question is, well, what does she plan on going into? She wants to do something with social work. Going to need math, but not going to really need algebra 2. So PC'd her out of that. She's going to MACAE next fall. Yes, she's going to take the test, but she's also in a middle college program. So she's already taken it and did okay on the math test when she took it already. So I don't know if it's necessarily a stress on that aspect more than it is making sure we prepare them to go on to that next step, but algebra 2 might not necessarily be a major part of that next step.
Stacy?
So to kind of go build on what Whitney was saying too, worst case scenario, obviously we want to prepare our students, right? But worst case scenario, 2-3 years, a student decides to go to university, takes their placement test, and needs to redo algebra 2 according to the placement. They can come back to adult ed and do it for free under adult secondary ed. So there you go. Like, just re-enroll them to give them what they need if they need to review it, or take it because they never took it with you in the first place. Make sense?
Yeah.
It's just
That's
an
a good
option.
idea.
It's obviously, I don't think what we want to say is our preferred practice, but there's a safety net.
Go along with that, like I said, we have Mott near us, and Mott has they have an adult GED program. They don't offer high school completion, but they do offer GED. And I don't know what they ended up doing with it, but at one point the talk was students who came in to Mott didn't test high enough on the math, and they would have had to go into those refresher math classes that cost you $800, $900, and they don't count towards anything. But they make you take them. Instead, they talked about actually putting those students into their GED program just to build those math skills, and they could do it for free because it was part of adult ed. I don't know if they actually did and finally actually followed through on that, but they were discussing that.
That might be a good conversation to have with the local community colleges in general. You know, if you have students that are here in math, send them over to us. Those are, good ideas. The couple of times that we've done this with the Algebra 2B, the people that I can think of already had a job that they were hired at, and it was contingent on them getting a diploma. So they didn't have college like on the horizon because they already had a job lined up. Does anybody have any successful examples of a PC that they want to share? Anyone else? I've had a couple.
I mean, I would just say, and we use it all the time. I'm in charge of the adult ed program and the alternative high school program for Huron Valley Schools, and I use it constantly. Some of the things are sort of just standard for our alternative program for high school, in that the swapping out of the second year of foreign language, some of those things, or swapping in extra math classes, English classes, those kinds of things for other subject areas. I just use it constantly. One of the things I always struggle with, and I struggle with our district on, is the documentation of it. Because as you guys all know, working in this realm, the plan changes like a lot sometimes. And so you might initially have an idea for a PC that looks like this, but then, you know, a semester later, it looks like this now, and we've changed it from this to this. And so honestly just decided to do all the documentation at the end now, rather than doing it at the beginning, because it's just so much work.
Mhm.
And so that is another thing that we've been going round and round about with the district a little bit, is that they have a very particular form they would like us to use, although there isn't a required form for this. You could make your own, but there's a little inconsistencies about what it looks like. The one the district asks us to use is just really not user friendly. And so I'm using a variation on it that's much better. But the actual practice of it has changed over the course of the years. And I think if you could take anything from when to use it, and Whitney, you raised your hand, just do it at the end, and then get your signatures as needed. It's a lot easier than doing it, changing it, doing it, changing it, doing it, changing it. But I would use it as often as possible to help out your kiddos.
Yeah, and old kiddos too. We've had some older people that have used it. Our classes are self-paced, so I literally wait until they're about to be done and do this paperwork right before graduation. And we also, which I'm sure lots of you in adult ed experience, students just disappearing into the night. So I don't want to drop a document, have them disappear and come back in 2 years, and then, yeah, we wait.
But then how do you have that conversation with them from the beginning on like, okay, these are your expected, credits that you will complete, and sort of have them be like part of the plan or know what to expect if you haven't written that
We have
off?
the whole conversation with them. This is what your plan is going to be. These are the credits that you would have required. If you want to, we can substitute this class in for Algebra 2B. If you're good with that, work on these classes and finish them. And then we just sign the paper later. We have the conversations all the time. So this is one that we had done for a student. Obviously I changed the name and the birthday. But this was a student who did come from out of state, had a job lined up, had a ton of CTE classes. And so I also just fill in what I can beforehand. And a lot of this, we just check off, with pen. So as I'm meeting with the student, sometimes we meet, this was during COVID. So we did this document on a bench outside of Michigan Works. So the building was closed and we met there. All the conversations had happened with the teacher prior. So that's where we did this one. And all of this mainly stays the same. I will share our blank documents with Patrick. And this came from the state. Like, we didn't create this from scratch. It's a pretty basic, but you just, fill in their career pathway. That your reasoning for doing it that supports their future. So he had a bunch of CTE classes and they supported that senior math credit and the Algebra 2B. And just get signatures. Like I said, I'm the designee for our district and I just stick it in their file with their transcripts because they're practically graduating at the point that we sign it. It's super simple. There's a lot of spaces that are left blank. The form's not too difficult. So I'll share this blank adult ed form for general education. We have one for the alternative and it's really just a change in logo. This is for students with an IEP. I don't know if you guys are wanting to like read through some of the things that we have on here. But it's just basically that the student and the parent understands the differences. Somebody might be here. It's not much different for special ed. You can just change more things. And then I was just going to show, this is our student plan. When we're doing a transcript analysis. Sorry about my dog. So yeah, we'll oftentimes stick in for this second year foreign language. Some of those CTE or fine arts classes. So I will send out these things. Any questions or comments, concerns? What? Just realized I'm muted. Sorry, talking away. We just have a couple of slides left. This is the process at the alternative. AEA is our alternative. So there's a request. Usually it's by the student or the teacher. A determination if modifications are allowable. The teacher usually talks with me about it. There's a committee meeting. Ours usually happen over Zoom or just through phone calls. Just because we're really spread out all over the place. So we do a lot of things by Zoom. And then the team will analyze and review the transcripts and records, the EDP and their goals, IEP if they have one, current assessments, requirements for post-secondary goals. The teacher completes the PC form and collects signatures. And it's, signed by the designee. And then it's stored in their CA60 or for adult ed in their intake file. And then it says it's reviewed annually. For adult ed, we wait to do these. Alternative ed, they might start sooner just because they have some students who are actual like 9th, 10th graders. Any questions?
Whitney, it's Stacy. Do you use your PC with all of your adult students, or do you have only some of the adults that would be required to meet the Michigan merit curriculum?
So we have anybody that enrolled after like 2018, I think it was 2016, 2018. We require everyone to do Michigan merit curriculum. Our board wants people to be competitive in the job market. So we only do a PC for students really for that Algebra 2B requirement, or if they had a PC at a prior school.
So even an adult who, say, was in traditional high school, I guess, 80s, 90s, and comes back to school in your adult program, your district requires them to meet the Michigan merit curriculum, even though they wouldn't have taken like English 9 or Algebra 2, because those weren't requirements back then.
Right. So we will usually put whatever English was taken during that year in on our student plan as like English 9. That's how we do our transcript analysis. Especially for some of those older ones. But they do still have to take like the first year of foreign language.
And say we do ours a little different. It does, what we end up doing is we have access to CEPI, their CEPI records to see, and if you look at the way everything is written, whether they're required to meet MMC or not really depends on when they were in 8th grade for the first time. But we usually just look at the transcript and say, okay, when did they start 9th for the first time? And if we don't have transcripts that are very clear, then we'll look back in CEPI and see when they would have been in 8th grade or 9th grade for the first time and see what that would have put their original graduation date as. If it was before 2011, we have still 18 credits, but it's a different set of 18 credits. And we base that off on what the district's requirements were pre-MMC. And if there would have been 2011 to now, and I know there was a little change in the foreign language. It went from 1 year for sure, and then a second year with the wiggle room in there. But everybody after that would have been 2011 or later, no matter when they register with us, those are MMC requirements. And we have two different, like you got your tracking form, we have something similar, but we have two different ones. One for, we call it pre-MMC and MMC. And so it requires a little more work on our part as far as determining which one they fall under, but it's really not that hard, and it's pretty beneficial to the students. Especially, we've had somebody who came in, they were 69 years old and hadn't been in school in almost 50 years. Actually, probably over 50 years, dropped out when he was like 15, 16 years old. And those transcripts from that long ago, just, there's no way to translate those into an MMC relatable transcript. So we definitely make sure we keep those two separate.
Yeah, I wish that we could do that. I've brought it up a few times. And like I said, for everything that we've talked about today, it does all have to be approved by your board. So you can't go and do a PC tomorrow if you don't have board approval. But you could draw something up pretty quickly for them to approve. And I think most are on board. Any other questions?
Hey, Whitney, this is Michelle from Sturgis. I put a copy of the PC we use, a link to the form we use in the chat. If anybody wants to download that and save a copy in their Google, they can. And then you can manipulate that. You can change the heading and the logo to make it your own if you want.
And it looks just the same, right?
Yep, it pretty much, it's a very standard one. So if anybody wants to save that, you know, you can take out the Sturgis and take out obviously the Trojan head and put your own logo in there and make that your own.
Yeah, I like yours is a lot shorter than ours.
Our district has their own, and it's got all that same information, but it's shorter too. It's like a front and back page. Catherine asked earlier, and I answered in the chat the best I could, but just, you mentioned it has to be board approved. Her question was, if they're using the PC guidelines for the regular high school students, would that adult ed just follow that, or would it have to be a separate board approval? I think that would, maybe somebody else got a different idea, but I think it would probably just check with your superintendent, check with your board to make sure. But my general thought is, if they're using PCs with the high school students, I don't see why they would have any kind of issue using PCs with your adults. And if they do, I don't know, but I don't see it being an issue. But I would maybe double check and make sure that
Not
They're-
just the fact that they're using PCs, but like the exact same sort of, guidelines, like for, Algebra 2B or, MMC versus non-MMC or something like that. Like, do you think we would have to just follow those same ones or?
yeah, because meetings I've sat in, Whitney, maybe you got a different answer, but the guidelines are, since they have to meet Michigan merit, if even as adults, if they're out Michigan merit curriculum in that range, they have to meet those Michigan merit. So the PC is pretty much the same guidelines.
Yeah. And if there's something that you would want that's different, I would just draw up the language that you want and present that to the board for approval. And I mean, I don't know why you couldn't just use the same forms and stuff if they already have them created.
And I see was asking there, how would it work with homeschool? Stacy, I think, answered that, and Stacy knows way more about this than I do. That since
What
that's
was
not,
the answer to that?
she said since it's a non-public, homeschool is considered a non-public school, they would be counted as a transfer, like under the transfer PC.
Okay. And I know that for homeschool, you can create your own transcripts too. So I would think you could transfer in whatever classes students had for homeschool.
Just
Whitney, I got a
curious.
question. Oh, sorry. Go
Okay.
ahead, Diane.
Thank you. I was just curious, like sometimes we have students come in with 1.5 credit of English 9. Do you bump that extra English credit up to cover another English? I'm just assuming transcripts weren't shared between schools, especially when you have students who come in with like they've been in 5 different schools. Just curious what you do.
Like it was taken at different schools or 9.5 or 1.5 at the same school?
I mean, we've had both.
I would think 1.5 at the same school would be a trimester. So it would be all of that English 9 content. So it would just go under English 9. If it's multiple schools, sometimes, I don't know. We will sometimes use a credit, like if a student has taken the same class, sometimes I feel like shame on the counselor for wasting their time when they've passed it this many times. Sometimes we will give like a half credit or whatever it is, but not if it's from the same school, because that's content over 1 year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but usually if it's a trimester, usually if it's like that, they'll have like the 0.33, 0.33, 0.34. But
yeah, I don't know. Does anybody else have thoughts on that?
I don't mind to weigh in. I think it's a judgment call, so sometimes you'll see those trimester schools where it's a 0.5 credit each trimester and they have 3 trimesters of English 9 because that spans the entire course of their freshman year, which makes sense. But one of the unique things potentially about the ELA curriculum for high school is that the standards are essentially the same, but then they're added to each year in complexity. And so making a judgment call to utilize an extra English 9 to replace another class, I think is fair to
You
do.
can come in.
Especially if you got a situation where you got a kid in a credit deficit situation and you're trying to help them and a plan towards graduation. I wouldn't feel bad about that at all.
And another thing I've heard Rochelle say is when you think about credit, it's not based on the class, it's based on the standards. So if you can say, oh, well, they fulfilled the English standards within those 3 half credits, I don't see why you couldn't count it. I'm pretty sure we probably have used some wiggle room there. But just because it was English 9, did it meet those English standards? And like Ben just said, it does get more complex year after year, but it's still the standards.
So we see it often, I've seen it with English as well, but we usually see it with Algebra 1 taken across 3 trimesters rather than 2 trimesters. Our own district offers both formats. We call them the AB format and the ABC format. So it's the same content, just different credit amounts based on the pacing of the course. So when they take it in ABC format, what we do as a district is count the A portion as their math elective / senior math. It's not senior math, but that math elective. And then the BC counts as the algebra credit. I would take the same approach with English. 1.5 credits of English 9 would be a credit in English, and that other half would go towards their elective. That's what we would do here.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, I'd just say one more thing. I guess I'm thinking my lunch bell is going to ring here in 2 seconds, so I'm going to make this fast. But I think the overall, I think we overall have more flexibility than I think we have. And so if you're feeling like maybe it potentially could move into a space where I could use this for something else, I think there's probably room for you to do that in the best interest of the kid, as long as you can justify the use of it. And I was just thinking about that Algebra 1 example. I've done that before. You know, you got a kiddo who has 3 sections of Algebra 1 for whatever reason from another district, and then how do you use that last one? Well, you could use it as a math elective option. You know, that's one less class that kid could have to have. I think, you know, just like I said, I think overall we have more flexibility than I think we feel like we do sometimes. And if you're a real type A person, maybe that feels a little strange. If you're a little bit more flexibly minded, you might feel just perfectly fine with that.
Thanks, Ben. That was great. I definitely can feel that. I think I started out coming in as a type A person, and I'm trying so hard to become more flexible. My boss is flexible minded and created these great programs, and trying to learn from her. So thanks for sharing that. Anybody else have any final thoughts? All right, well, we'll have a few extra minutes for lunch. Chad, do you have our timeline for the rest of the day? I know there's one more session, but I don't have the times to share with everyone. I can pull them up if you don't.
Let me double check. Lunch break is from 11:45 to 12:15. And then from 12:15 to 12:15 to 12:45. There's a link in the schedule for large group session. Patrick's doing a MACAE Association legislative update, and then another break from 12:45 to 1, and then the last session from 1 to 2:15. Okay. I believe that takes us to the end of the day.
And I will just add in on that legislative update, if you have not contacted your representative or your senator, there's an opportunity for us all to get more funding next year. So if you can advocate for your program in advocating for us all as a whole, that would be great. Patrick, I know, has sent out a few times some talking points. I did a little coffee talk with one of our representatives, and I just printed that out and handed it to him. And then I could look at it as I was talking to him too. But I'm sending...
do it right away, and just copy and paste what he said, because everybody needs to have the same message. He doesn't want people modifying it and putting different stuff in there. So, because I think they're voting on it really quick. So
yeah, Patrick sent out, it was earlier this week, I can't remember what day, but he sent out an email, and I believe it went to all members, with just a little form letter in there that you could fill in your program name and your name, and you could then, and he even had the links in his email to go if you weren't sure who your representatives were or who your senator was for your area, that you could then go through and find your rep and your senator and fire that off to their emails. I know I did that to 2 of our local representatives and our area senator. So, and if you just use that form letter, that keeps the message pretty consistent across the board. So,
Yep, we need to stay united. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining the session. And I will share the forms, and I'll also share that last one from the Trojan, and have Patrick put that out with everything that becomes available.
I agree with what Joy said. We could use some of that extra money, could hire some more counselors to help with PCs.
Or honestly, I would love a social worker. That's what when I've met personally with my reps, I'm like, I really need staff. Most of our staff is part-time, covering multiple counties. And if we could just have even a social worker to help with the needs, that would be great. But yeah.
And for those of you who weren't sure, because I see it in the comment now, we've mentioned Rochelle Bowerman a couple of times. She, at the state level at MDE, she is the PC person. So if you're ever like, oh, what did they say in MACAE, and you can't get a hold of one of us, or even when we have questions, Rochelle's the one we go to. She's presented at MACAE meetings before, but unfortunately couldn't help with today's. But I think this presentation is pretty much hers with some additions. So, but on that note, just thank you, Whitney, for taking the time to put this together, to do this. I know it's something a lot of us, some programs use very well, and some programs are just like, how can I use it? How can I use this to benefit my students? I know that's where I'm at right now. So thank you again. Couple last minute reminders, just don't forget about the sketch form when it comes out. Make sure you get that submitted by the 19th. And then Whitney already said it, but all of this, once I stop the recording here, I'm going to get these sent to Patrick sometime before the end of this week or beginning of next week. And he'll get them up and let everybody know when they're available. But other than that, unless anybody else got any questions, I think we're good to go.
Whitney and Kelly, if you want to stay on, I have an update about the student I mentioned to you last week.
Okay, we can stop the recording, Chad.